Welcome back, everyone, and this is our session on economic growth. I'm not aware of a single county council who hasn't prioritised economic growth in their areas. I certainly know it's the top topic in Staffordshire. We're lucky to be joined today by the Learning and Work Institute and the EEF, the manufacturers organisation, to discuss all the ways in which county councils can support the strategic growth of businesses. I've had an email this morning. I've managed to read the report that's come out today. Counties hold over 50% of the employment in construction, motor trades, manufacturing, and we know the importance of supporting these industries. Chris Richards works closely with EEF's manufacturing member companies to identify barriers, assess solutions, and deliver policy recommendations. We're very interested to hear what more we can do to support these industries. And we also know that there's more work to be done in delivering up-to-date skills. It will not be a surprise to members that CCN research has found that addressing the skills misalignment within counties could add approximately £8 billion to the GVA, to the country's economy, and support 700,000 more people into jobs. So with that in mind, we're also delighted to welcome Stephen Evans, Chief Executive of the Learning and Work Institute, to promote lifelong learning and skill development to deal with the challenges we face in employment, in productivity and inclusion, and in developing healthy communities. So with no more ado, I'll hand over to Chris.
Good morning all, and thanks to the County Councils Network for inviting me to speak. I think most of you would have probably had the email from us launching our discussion paper today on the roles that of devolution within England in terms of supporting manufacturers to grow. I'm from EEF, the representative body for the manufacturing community in the UK, representing all industrial sectors and all industrial sizes right across the UK, with offices in every English region and Wales and Northern Ireland. And working in the industrial policy and economics team at EEF, I kind of lead on our work on local economic development. So over the last 3 or so years, I've been engaging with our members right across the country, trying to understand a bit around what the local business environment challenges that they're facing, and also how councils right across the country can help support them to grow. I just wanted to share some insight today from that engagement that we've been doing with members and some of the challenges and ambitions of the sector, and how local government, like I said, can help to support that ambition. And the sector is ambitious, so we published a report about 2 weeks ago setting out our industrial strategy work. I think the key thing that came out of that report is actually, there are a vast number of manufacturers who actually do want to grow, and we know the industrial strategy that's coming out in 2 weeks is a core bit that will underpin that in terms of what central government can do to kind of support the sector going forward, to kind of boost productivity, investment and exports. But it's not all about central government, and obviously that's why I'm here today. Local policymakers have a key role to play in terms of embedding the foundations of growth and championing their local area. We know the upcoming industrial strategy will be talking a bit about place and the role of place in supporting growth, and we'll know, like I said, more about that in the coming weeks. But for manufacturers, place does matter. The sector has a long and proud history of helping to find places positively, offering the jobs, training and investment for the area. And what I wanted to do is just spend some time talking about what we think local government can do to support manufacturers in that. So our surveys and visits with members through our regional advisory boards, lots of engagement, brings out the same issue time and time again in terms of what are the challenges at the local level. And that's the poor state of infrastructure and the need for better public transport, particularly in non-urban areas. Our recent survey this September showed that these two areas are still rated as the worst thing about local business environments right across England. And unsurprisingly, they're also the areas that are seen as the top priorities for local action. And many people often go directly for skills, as the focus of manufacturers do bring up skills, and skills is important. But we'll never actually tackle, I think, the skills problem if we continue to underinvest in public transport and infrastructure. And 68% of our members in a survey we did in September said they would have access to a wider talent pool if there were better public transport in their local area. So for them, it's a key underpinning function of delivering on their skills requirements. And that's one of the reasons why EEF is supportive of the government's approach to devolution so far, particularly the financial focus that it's placed on transport. And we've seen where devolution deals are granted and signed off by local government, the manufacturers do actually step up to kind of help support and provide evidence in terms of where local areas can help support their growth ambitions. Earlier this year in Cornwall, we held a devolution forum where we identified some of the priorities that will be enabled as part of their devolution deal. And that included one of the key things around the table, the opportunity to better coordinate bus routes between colleges and businesses to actually allow apprentices to actually get the jobs and opportunities in manufacturing. I mean, it's, a lot of people think public transport not as important, but for our members, it's definitely their top priority when it comes to what's holding them back at the moment at the local level. And so as a result, we think all areas should have a devolution deal to help support businesses in their area to grow through faster, more responsive action in local areas on issues like transport that someone sat in Whitehall will never actually be able to fully understand and get right. But we know not all areas are kind of feel they can fully take advantage of devolution deals for a variety of different reasons. And in a paper published today, Manufacturing Local Growth, we set out what we think are some of the initial steps that are needed to help enable all areas to take advantage of a devolution deal. In the remaining time, I just wanted to touch on a few of those quickly and kind of highlight what EEF will be pushing for in our discussions with government as part of that industrial strategy, but more broadly as part of the devolution agenda going forward. The first is, I think, the government needs to reaffirm its commitment to devolution, in particular the principles that underpin it. And for us, that's a focus on functional and economic geographies, local action getting local payback, and regional decisions having a strong regional mandate. Now, the Secretary of State yesterday, I know, kind of set out, kind of reaffirm that in terms of government support, but I think we need to hear it repeated more often and more loudly going forward. And secondly, there are some areas where I think structures are holding back councils from taking advantage of devolution, and we believe there needs to be a greater push for areas to scale up through mergers. England, as you know, has over 300 local authorities, and in two areas, county councils do the vast majority of the work and are at the scale to do things a bit more strategically than lower tiers of government. And there are many benefits to reorganisation and scaling up, and some of this I know was outlined yesterday. Manufacturers want to see more councils coming forward with proposals to merge into larger unitary authorities, mapping onto a functional economic geography with a strong mandate to deliver a strong devolution deal. And lastly, central government needs to, I think, incentivise a lot of this. Now, the Secretary of State said he wants bottom-up deals. I think there is something that central government can do as well to make sure that you have the fiscal incentive to actually go for that and actually encourage low tiers of government to scale up as part of a devolution deal. And the first thing we've outlined in our report is the full suite of property taxes being devolved and retained locally in combined authority areas and unitary authority areas that map onto that functional and economic area. Secondly, I think there's a debate that might need to be started on council tax. Residential property valuations are now, as you know, 25 years old. The government may need to consider revaluation at some point in this parliament, if not certainly in the next. Council tax and business rates, in our view, are two sides of the same coin. There are opportunities to capture the value of regional growth through property taxes, and that's been established as part of the debate on 100% business rates retention. If the government saw the need to go down that route, there's an opportunity here, I think, to devolve the responsibility to trigger a revaluation to local areas, and that could be a good step forward for devolution and allowing local areas to kind of get more responsibility for their areas. Scale will be important, and equally a regional mandate. But there may be an opportunity for local government to play a more active role, I think, in local taxation going forward. So just to kind of sum up, regardless of your views on devolution, it's happening. We know it's happening. We've got mayoral elections next year in large parts of the country. So getting the governance and principles right as part of that, I think is important to make sure we deliver real progress in strengthening local business environments. And we'll be pushing these issues, like I said, in the months and years ahead, particularly as the government looks to try and rebalance the economy and deliver better local growth as well. Thank you.
And now we'll hand over to Stephen. So, Stephen.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the invite along today. Now, I think we are probably the last session between everyone in this room and lunch, which is quite a dangerous place to be, in my experience. So I'll try and keep it relatively brief. Now, at the Learning and Work Institute, we've been around for just over 90 years, and we do lots of work around trying to influence policy around employment, skills and learning, and trying new things on the ground as well. So we do lots of work in this field. But whilst we've been around for 90 years, I think that really 2016 is probably the most topsy-turvy of all those years. And the answer to any pub quiz question in the future that starts with "in what year?" it's probably 2016. So I haven't even got room for most of the things that have happened during the course of this year. So some of you may have noticed that we voted to leave the European Union earlier this year, and I know Brexit has kind of featured a lot in the discussions, as inevitably it will, because it's absolutely huge. And the nature of the deal that we get will affect how we can deliver local economic growth and make sure that growth is inclusive. But actually, post-Brexit, I think, is the phrase that's going to crop up increasingly about what we do after we leave whatever deal we've got. So after Brexit, we then got this new government, and I don't know if some of you remember, there was this guy called David Cameron, and he was the Prime Minister for a time. It feels like a lifetime away. This was when Ed Balls wasn't the star of Strictly Come Dancing, but could have been the Chancellor. It feels like a lifetime ago. So although there's lots of familiar faces around that table, actually most of the ministers in each department have changed, of course. And I know you had Sajid and here yesterday, and Chris Grayling as well. So Ministry of Government changes in the ministers, change in a set of priorities as well. Big things going on around employment and skills, and particularly the Apprenticeship Levy. So this levy on the payroll of large employers to fund future apprenticeship growth to hit the government's 3 million apprenticeship target by 2020. And that's obviously going to have a direct impact on most, if not all, of local government as levy payers, but also many of the organisations that you work with and fund as well. And that's going to be the most overused phrase for the apprenticeship levy is game changer, but I can't think of a better one. It's going to fundamentally change the nature of the relationship between employers and the skills system. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. And then devolution in general. So I know it's obviously been a massive theme of the last couple of days, but I'll talk a bit more about what it means in the context of employment and skills and how that links into delivering local economic growth. So lots and lots and lots of changes, and that's not even half of it. But in some ways, everything stays the same. So a lot of the problems or challenges that we've got now that we need to tackle in order to deliver local economic growth and make sure it's inclusive are the same challenges we had before the referendum, the same challenges before we had the general election last year, and probably the same challenges we had 20-odd years ago as well. So across the UK, we have 6 million people in low-paid work, and of every 4 people that was low-paid in 2001, 3 were still low-paid 10 years later. So we have a higher concentration of low pay than other OECD countries, and people often get stuck in low pay. And that's an issue in terms of people being able to afford to buy a house or to pay the rent on their housing. It's an issue in terms of benefit claims, so big growth in in-work benefit claimants, for example, more people in in-work poverty than out-of-work poverty today. And it's a big challenge in terms of social mobility as well, which links me on to my second question, which hopefully at least some of you, or picture rather, which hopefully at least some of you recognise. And it's slightly depressing that we could probably replicate this sketch today, obviously with some different personnel in there, but the picture would be broadly the same. So it's a depressing fact that 40% of your income as an adult was determined by the income of the household that you grew up in. In other words, if you grew up in a low-income household, you're far more likely to be a low-income adult. And half of that gap is down to education. So again, if your parents did less well at school, you're far less likely to be at school. So Theresa May has talked a lot about the just managing families. She's talked a lot about social mobility and life chances. Learning and skills and employment opportunities are at the heart of a lot of that. and making sure that everyone gets the chance to fulfil their talents, and that you get a chance to progress from low pay as well. Last one I wanted to highlight, again, I could have put lots of things on here about the long-term labour market and economic growth challenges, but the last one I thought I'd highlight was around the disability employment rate gap. So if you have a health problem or disability, your employment rate is 32 percentage points below the employment rate for people without health problems and disabilities. So that's a massive, massive gap, and it's bigger than in other countries. And the government's got a manifesto target to halve that gap by 2020. So we did some analysis in the summer which showed that on current trends it's going to take 200 years to halve that gap. So as an ex-civil servant, I would describe that as broadly off track. Further action needed. A brave ambition set. So the good news is the government is starting to consult on what we can do about this. They launched a green paper on work and health last week. It probably raises more questions than answers, and actually in a blog on our website we picked out quotes from green and white papers from the last 15 years that could have just been slotted into this one. So in some ways the debate hasn't moved on. But one of the big things to halve that gap is to integrate services together, because you need health, housing, employment, skills, learning, and employers all to work together. And the best chance you've got of making that happen is at local government level. You can't do it at national level. So all of these are massive challenges. They're challenges we had before the referendum. They're challenges now. And I guess my contention is that effective devolution is needed to fundamentally tackle all of them. So here's what we've called for in sum, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I think the role of local government is in delivering that. And the title of this slide, A Change Has Got to Come, comes from Theresa May's conference speech, which this was her refrain along a number of different issues. So the first thing is around basic skills. So no one quite if you don't work in this sector, no one quite believes these figures, but they are true. There are 9 million adults in this country who have low literacy or numeracy, and there are 11 million adults who have low digital skills. That's far higher than many other countries, and it locks people out of opportunity. It locks people out of being able to use public services digitally, for example. It locks people out of career progression opportunities, and it locks people out of social inclusion as well. So together with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation in their Solve UK Poverty Strategy, which is well worth a read if anyone hasn't read it before, we called for £200 million more investment per year, every year for the next 15 years, so that every adult gets the chance to get those basics that you need for life and work in the 21st century. So that would be doubling the current levels of investment. Secondly, that drive to full employment, the biggest gap that holds us back from full employment is disability employment. And as I said, the only way to get there is to integrate services together. Third point is around social mobility. We need to smash the link between parental educational outcomes and children's educational outcomes. And again, that's about more than schools. 3 million apprenticeships. The government's definitely going to deliver that target one way or another. We think it should be in a really high quality and accessible way. So, for example, if you're from a BAME background, you're half as likely to get through the application process for an apprenticeship. There's this massive, massive drop-off. So we think action is needed to tackle that. Similarly, we've just started some work around stereotypes, gender stereotypes in STEM sectors, and how we, for example, get more women into those apprenticeship opportunities. So we need quality and accessible and flexible apprenticeships. And then in terms of progression, we called a year or so ago for a new advancement service that we said should be devolved to city, regions, local authorities and local government in general, coupled with a new system of personal loan accounts so that the state can invest along with employers and individuals together, a co-investment for a shared benefit. So those are the 5 headline changes that we've called for, and I think actually local government's got a massive role in all of them. So I've kind of split this into 2, and I'll finish on this one. So Partly it's around being really ambitious around devolution. So some of you may have the joy of being involved in discussions with the DWP around the Work and Health Programme. So the Work and Health Programme is 80% smaller than the work programme it replaces. So we need far more investment if we're going to halve the disability employment rate gap, not less. But in principle, it offered or offers an opportunity to integrate those services better together. But to do that, it needs a proper role for local government. Second is around post-Brexit social investment. So when we leave the European Union in probably 2019, then ESF and ERDF will finish. And how do we make sure that social investment continues post-Brexit, but is devolved to local government? And then thirdly, the adult education budget, where there are some areas of the country having discussions around what devolution might mean for them, but it tends to be city regions, and actually we think it needs a wider push towards devolution across the whole of the country and proper flexibility to deliver skills in a different way. And then the last set is around what I've kind of sometimes termed the soft power of local government. So actually, local authorities are, of course, employers, procurers, and local leaders, and have great links with local employers. So how do we use that role to drive up employment and skills opportunities? With apprenticeships, there isn't going to be a devolution of the Apprenticeship Levy budget to local government. The Apprenticeship Levy will sit in the account of large employers. But actually, if you, as local government, manage to drive up demand locally, manage to get employers to take on more apprentices, there will be more of that investment happening in your area. So that's something that's not about shaping supply so much as it is about raising demand. And then lastly, we've been doing some work with London government around how learning and skills and employment fits into a bigger picture for the area as a whole. So when Chris was talking about it's no good just focusing on skills, because actually if you widen transport, then you widen employers' talent pools. Well, actually, you do also need skills in order to build that infrastructure investment. You can't build the new houses we need unless you've got the construction skills. You can't build the roads and rails unless you've got the skills to do it. So we think that skills investment needs to be a full part of infrastructure investment and helping to deliver it fully. So that was a really rapid rattle through. Hopefully that gives a bit of a sense about where we think there's some real opportunities to tackle those entrenched challenges and to make the most of the changed circumstances and the new opportunities that have arisen. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Stephen. The interesting thing with Brexit, we had a Brexit debate up in Staffordshire the other day, and one thing that came through, which was probably affects both of you. One is the high-level skills that we've been bringing into the country, particularly in health service with doctors, etc., and also the low-level skills. So there could be something about innovation and automation to get people skilled up and doing it. So can you just, what are your thoughts about that for the future? Because there's quite a mindset change.
Yeah, so I just quickly go first. I mean, the other thing that I didn't talk about is actually the fundamental change going on in the economy and the labour market anyway. So, you know, the kind of the so-called gig economy and the rise of things like Uber and Deliveroo and lots of things like that. So actually, the nature of jobs and the nature of the skills needs is going to change, as well as the sort of post-Brexit policy regime. So if you think about that in the context of lengthening working lives, young people leaving full-time education today are likely to have a 50-year career or something in that order. And they're going to need to change their jobs and their careers and their skill sets during the course of that working life. And so education can't be just something that happens at school and then you're set for life. You need the skills that give you that flexibility to change as the skills needs change, as the care sector grows, as technology replaces jobs or changes the nature of jobs. And that's why I think lifelong learning is really at the heart of making sure that economic growth can continue, and whatever the changes that happen in policy, in Brexit, in technology, in the labour market, that people can adapt to it, because the one certainty is there's going to be lots more change.
Yeah, Chris?
Brilliant. I think we'll have to wait and see what the actual final deal looks like in terms of Britain's future relationship with the EU, but it's definitely a worry for manufacturers in terms of the number of people they employ at the moment who are from the rest of Europe, because they do need the high skills, and there's been some challenges over the long term in terms of getting those skills. I think there's also a change happening within manufacturing in terms of the driving uptake of new digital technologies, more automation. Some of that might be driven forward if, as a result, we don't have a fair migration deal with Europe, so they might look to more automation to kind of replace the talent that they might lose.
Mm-hmm. Going to ask, which was about the sort of future of manufacturing and the loss of those low-skilled jobs to advanced automation. So given that we've got 11 million people who have, no or very low digital skills, can I have the sort of panel's view on where we need to go, not to address the skills gap today, but to address the skills gap that we're talking about in that 50-year future of who knows what?
Yeah, I mean, if I just follow up on that point, I think that the key thing around this kind of digital uptake is manufacturing has increasingly become a more high-skilled kind of employee base. So more and more people are requiring higher levels of qualifications to kind of get into manufacturing. I think this wider issue around kind of digital skills more broadly within the economy is something that, as part of an industrial strategy, we will need to tackle, because it's not just manufacturing which will have an issue if we don't tackle that. The main thing I'd say though as part of that is this isn't about necessarily getting rid of jobs. There are new jobs that will be created, and some of these technologies will actually reduce the barrier towards working with machinery more so than now than we have in manufacturing. So there's an opportunity here as well, I think, in terms of kind of broadening out that talent pool and making people a bit more generalist within the shop floor.
Steve?
Yeah, and there's just this is partly about the local economy, but it's also about what kind of society we want to be, because there's a big link between having those basics and participating in society and voting and being engaged in the community and being socially included. So it's an economy and society question, I think. I mean, I think the sort of, I guess what I'd say is that most of the changes that are coming can't really be predicted. The one certain thing about all predictions is that they will be wrong, but it's about direction of travel. So we need to equip people with the flexibility to adapt to those changes. There was so John Maynard Keynes wrote a paper sort of about 80 years ago, I think, which suggested that by now we would be working a maximum 15-hour, I think, working week, and we'd only be doing that because we wouldn't have quite lost the habit of work. And he suggested that even aristocrats would want to do a bit of the housework that their servants were doing, because they wouldn't want to lose the habit of doing something. But technology and affluence would mean that we didn't really need to do any work. Now, this, in case you were wondering, has not happened. What that does say is that technology always changes things. Globalisation changes things. The first big wave of globalisation was probably in the Victorian times, and new things come along. The challenge is to make sure that the new things are better than the old things, and that people are able to make the most of them and adapt to them. So that says get the basics, and it means flexibility and adaptability and changing your skill set throughout your working life as the skills needs change.
Thank you, Steve. We're going to have a question now from the middle of the world, Cornwall.
Thank you very much. Adam Painter, Deputy Leader, Cornwall Council. Our devolution deal has helped us do more work on skills and employment, and it's helping us to try and get a bit further and get some of the things that you articulated around skills needs delivered. One area that we're struggling with, and I don't know if you've got any tips for us on, the LEP is clearly part of that delivery mechanism as well, to try and make sure the skills match up with the future needs in Cornwall. The problem we have is when we speak to our further and higher education providers, they're saying, well, it's purely bums on seats for us. We need the cash follows the pupils and the students, and we will supply the courses that they want to go on. And we're saying, hang on a minute, we need more engineers. We have these sectors that are there. We don't just want more hairdressers. So how can we get over that, and how can we match that up? I think it is a real issue, certainly for us and many other areas. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
Steve.
So I kind of make three quick points. So the first is about the role of labour market information. So I know some areas of the country are discussing with the Skills Funding Agency and with DFE about how there can be a requirement that local providers in their area take account of a local strategy, which is basically signalling where the jobs of the future are coming from to the extent that we know. So there is something about an overall strategy based on labour market information and how you have a requirement that providers and colleges demonstrate that they're delivering against that. The second is around focus on outcomes. So qualification attainment is a good measure, but it's only an input measure. The real purpose is to help people be socially included, it's to help people get jobs, it's to help people get on in jobs, it's to help employers meet their skills gaps. And so we've long argued that we should measure some of these things. So for example, the Department for Education now has linked data that shows people flowing through courses, so the individual learner record data, and HMRC data on what people are earning and whether they're working or not. So you can see somebody went to this college and now they're earning £10,000 more, whatever it happens to be. Part of the issue is that that data is being used as a research tool in central government more than it is to help local commissioners or local authorities or local employers or whoever. So we've said that data should be opened up. There should be an open data approach to allow each area of the country to see what's happening and to kind of target itself in that way. And then the third point is around co-investment. So actually, part of the reason why I use the hackneyed phrase game changer for the Apprenticeship Levy is because now if you're an employer, if you're a large employer, you're going to have a pot of cash in your account and you're going to have to make an active decision to invest it in this apprenticeship with this provider. And so you're going to be a more active consumer, if you like, in that market. The same's happening on the individual side, where at intermediate skills level, if you're over 24, I think, 24 and over, 24. You have to take out an advanced learner loan for that certain level of learning. And you're going to make a really active decision about putting your cash on the table. So I think it's a combination of a strategic role for local areas in setting a strategy and setting out the labour market information, getting those open measures of outcomes so we can see how the system's performing beyond the bums on seats and the qualifications, and then that role of co-investment and individuals and employers as active customers of the system.
I think I'd just echo those points around the apprenticeship levy. It's definitely something that's coming up from manufacturers. You know, the ability they'll have to drive kind of college provision and FE provision in their areas, because they'll now have the cash and have a much more, I think, active role in kind of shaping the system at that level. We held a devolution forum in Cornwall, which we've kind of gone into some length in our report we published today, setting out what manufacturers there were saying, and you know, some really good stuff coming out of that in terms of Cornwall being a good place to work, quality of life being high, and focusing on some of the positives around why Cornwall is important, why actually manufacturers choose to base themselves in Cornwall. But then also flipping that on its head, a lot of them mentioning things like FE colleges perhaps sometimes not being able to deliver courses because the uptake right across the board, it's too scattered. So there's an opportunity here as well, like I said in my speech, to use public transport to kind of shape how college provision is delivered, so that actually, you know, things as simple as being able to have apprentices on the Sunday shift is possible because there is bus provision.
Okay, we've got Martin at the back and then Izzy. Martin first. He's been
Should have
very
been ladies first, clearly. I couldn't let a discussion on economic development go past without asking about the panel's views on local enterprise partnerships. Obviously, since the demise of the old regional development agencies, LEPs are the government's chosen vehicle for economic development. But for counties in particular, that presents lots of problems. Some of us are lucky enough to have single county LEPs, but there are counties here that have 2 or even 3 LEPs they have to deal with. Some of us have overlapping LEPs, which are actually competing against each other for government funding within the same county area. They are a vehicle for government funding, but actually, you know, we are now finding a situation where money that used to come to us directly, particularly transport money, sustainable transport money and so on, now has to go through all the governance procedures of the LEPs, which can be very time-consuming, very protracted, and you get into all sorts of squabbles around the table. Do you find them effective vehicles, speaking from your perspective, for economic development, or do you have an alternative?
So, I mean, if I kick off, the main thing I'd say about LEPs is I think there was something, there was a clear role for them back in 2010, 2011 when they were set up to try and kind of bring together local authorities and businesses around a table to focus a bit around what are some of the strategic things we can do right across all functional economic areas. So from that point of view, on the principle of actually trying to take decisions across a wider area, we were definitely supportive of them. I think the risk we tend to run into when it comes to things like devolution programs or local growth programs is we have them for a while and then we suddenly go, it's not really delivering, let's try something new. Actually keeping something in place for a longer period of time and actually being able to see what the benefits are over that longer period of time, I think is much more effective than kind of going, it's 5 years later, nothing's happened or it's not working well enough. There are opportunities here, I think, to kind of change how LEPs work as part of devolution deals, particularly if you look at some of the areas kind of leading the forefront around devolution deals. They are working differently with their LEPs, and so I think as local authorities do step up and, like I said, scale up and take advantage of a devolution deal, in some areas the need for a LEP kind of is reduced as part of that.
Yeah, I think my slightly unhelpful answer to the question is it depends. I remember when John Hayes was the skills minister, and we had sector skills councils, which was going to be these employer bodies running across the country looking at sort of sectoral issues around skills. He remarked that some of them were pretty good and others weren't, and the ones that were good had started life as medieval guilds and evolved over the years. But we haven't got long enough to wait for all of that to happen for all those sectors. So it kind of depends, I guess, is the answer, and some are kind of further along than others, partly because they're longer established in previous guises. There is, particularly in the skill system, there's far too much chopping and changing. I came across a slide I'd done sort of 10 years ago showing the simplified system in England, and basically none of the bodies exist anymore. So there is too much chopping and changing, and you do need some stability. I guess my principle is that everything should be done at the lowest level possible, and that means some things need to be done at that sort of LEP level, and there's a question about whether the LEP's the right mechanism to do that, and then other things need to be done below that level, and other things need to be in the hand of individual employers and people. So it's a bit horses for courses, and it feels like we haven't pushed things down as far as we might do in all cases.
Yeah. Izzy?
I wanted to pursue the point that you started with, Philip, which is about the caring world and the skills for care of the future, the integrated workforce that we should be trying to develop now. And I think there's a real challenge for us nationally, because I don't think we've actually decided what that integrated workforce is going to look like. And for us as local authority leaders and members, this is going to be a key part of how we afford this very significant part of the services that we deliver. Now, I don't believe that we can really develop this easily with health partners at the moment, when they're particularly focused on the current type of skills, not the future type of skills, which is where we as local leaders have to get to, because we're going to be delivering services for the next generations and beyond. And I wonder if you've got a comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. We've got so we're evaluating a pilot that Glasgow Council are doing, or they're just about to start through their city deal, I think, which is about trying to support social care organisations in helping people to progress from low pay, the low pay issue I talked about before, but doing that by working with the employer to work up a business development plan to adapt to those kind of changes that are coming. And the challenge is always, how do you help people to progress and earn more money when there's not enough money in the system to start with? So that kind of requires a bit of creative thinking. I guess the kind of two other things I'd flag up in that context, which I think are of interest. So one, we're doing a pilot called Ambition London, which in East London is focusing on social care, which is trying to work with the Sector Skills Council, social care providers and the local authority to develop new ways of co-investing. So possibly individuals through the advanced learner loan system that I was talking about before, employers through the workforce development fund that sits within that sector, and then the local authority playing a role bringing that together with the skills system to sort of plan ahead and do those workforce development needs. So there'll be and interesting to see how that gets along. The other thing is around the apprenticeship levy, where that is going to create an extra pot of cash that either is going to disappear off as a tax or can be used a little bit differently to think about some of these things. So we're doing a bit of work this year on behalf of the Department for Education to work with local government to think about how that levy operates within the local government world, and particularly with the requirement on public bodies to take on a certain proportion of apprentices within the workforce. So if anyone's interested in sort of picking up some of that or hearing more about that, I'm happy to do that as well. But it feels like there are a couple of mechanisms to help do a bit of that, but they're not going to happen spontaneously without some leadership, and that's where I think local authorities have a really massive role to play.
Yeah, that's it. Chris?
No.
Okay, we've got to go back to the dreaded app now, I'm afraid. Chris has asked, Chris has asked that could we have 3 questions that you can please answer. So these are Chris's questions. I've been asked to stress these aren't the CCN questions. So the first one is the debate on council tax revaluation in England is long overdue. Have you got your devices out and answering the question?
Push my
I'll give you a little bit of time. Have you got are you doing it? Some are, yeah. Have we got enough to get a result? It's a bit like chits and chats in Florida, isn't it? And the Electoral College.
How's the Treasury?
Oh, good. Just my best work.
Ah,
Yeah, it's good fun. We had a little later.
so
There's
we have a
results.
result there. 15% are not sure, 46% strongly agree, 30% agree, and 7.7% disagree. The next question is, hang on, I've got the gate going along now, and to get it on, the greater fiscal incentives are needed to encourage more areas to take advantage of devolution. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, we did some work with Rochdale Council to get people engaged in basic skills provision.
Strongly agree,
Cost of
agree,
the savings,
not sure.
And for every pound they spent, they saved £3.68. But half of it went to the council, a third to the DVP, 10% to the NHS, and the rest to criminal.
It'll probably take this long in the American presidential election.
Yeah,
66% strongly agree, 11% not sure, and 22% agree. So we need a bit more money to encourage us to go down that line. And on balance, this is the the question that will get you really thinking. On balance, do you think that the creation of merging councils in England into larger ones would deliver financial benefits? So, vote on that one. I'm just looking at Cheshire. Where's Shropshire?
Most people think other councils should come.
Yeah.
Yeah. There'll be a result coming in any moment, I think. So we're all eyeing each other up. 50% strongly agree, 25% agree, 10% disagree, 5% strongly disagree, and 10% not sure. So, well, thank you very much for that. Just ask you to thank the panel in the usual way, and then